Okay.
Welcome to the What's in a Budget workshop presented by the Montana State Chapter Finance Committee. The state officers have received many inquiries about the state chapter's finances over the past several years. Today, we will present information that addresses the inquiries about how the Finance Committee operates, how the state chapter finances work, and how the annual budget is developed. There will be a lot of information shared today. The beauty of this virtual workshop is that you can pause, rewind, or stop the video to process the information at your own pace. The handout with this workshop is a questionnaire for convention attendees to print and complete. Please bring the completed form with you to convention and place in the basket at the convention registration desk for a chance to win one of 5 prizes. Winners will be announced at the Marguerite Banquet. This year's committee members are Leanne Forrester, Chapter AD, Sunny Davis, Chapter CH, myself, Jeannie Peterson, PSP, Chapter BU Chair, our State Treasurer, our advisor, Sheila O'Brien. Let's begin with the purpose and responsibilities of the Finance Committee. Sunny.
Purpose of the State Finance Committee is defined in the Montana State Chapter Bylaws, Article 5, Section 2. In short, the Finance Committee collaborates with the Executive Board of Montana State Chapter on budget development, appropriation of funds, investment of funds, and transfer of funds to be voted upon at each annual convention. Their advisor is the State Treasurer. The Finance Committee meets monthly throughout the year to review the monthly financial statements generated by the State Treasurer and to make financial recommendations. The Executive Board is invited to these meetings to collaborate with the committee. Through these collaborative efforts, the Finance Committee and Executive Board have a great working relationship based on trust, open communication, and transparency. And they are oftentimes on the same page when budget item expenses that could be reduced. The governing documents of the Finance Committee are the Montana State Chapter Bylaws and the P.E.O. Constitution.
Leanne. Leanne, you're on mute.
Sorry. The state chapter operates by fund accounting. Fund accounting is used by nonprofit organizations to manage and track financial resources by purpose rather than by measuring profit. Doing so divides financial resources into specific funds for specific purposes, such as the general operating fund, and it helps maintain transparency and accountability within the organization. Montana State Chapter has 7 different funds that it maintains. Think of each fund as a pot of gold. If the state chapter is the rainbow, there are seven different pots of gold under the rainbow, and each pot has its own purpose and accounting. The state finances are reported in the Montana State Chapter proceedings annually. These documents offer the transparency necessary for the finances of our organization. The Executive Board is required to report all income and expenses to the state chapter members. The state chapter's only significant source of income is through dues. Each member pays her own local chapter dues, which vary by state dues of $24.50 and international dues of $36. State chapter dues provide the income for the state chapter and is deposited into the general operating fund. $2 of the state dues are transferred into the International Convention Reserve Fund to fund Montana's attendance at Convention of International Chapter. The remaining $22.50 stays in the General Operating Fund. This is the amount of money that is budgeted each year for state chapter expenses. International dues are allocated at $30 for International's General Fund and $6 for Cotty College's General Fund and Building Fund. Cotty College now holds the titles to the college's buildings and land. The governance in Cotty College remains the same as does the financial support through the $6 from members' dues.
Each year, the state treasurer generates the summary of receipts and expenditures by funds report found on page R12 of the annual proceedings. Keeping the definition of fund accounting and the pots of gold visual in mind, this report shows all of the receipts and disbursements for each fund throughout the year. The state chapter's fiscal year runs from April 1st to March 31st. The columns show the balance beginning on April 1st, monies received and disbursed, and an ending balance as of March 31st. In our example of the summary page R12 from last year's convention proceedings, the monies shown in each column are from activities beginning April 1st, 2024 and ending March 31st, 2025. Activities for the 2025-2026 fiscal year will be reported in the 26th convention proceedings. The general operating fund acts as the state chapter's checking account. That is the fund that receives dues income and disperses money as allocated by the Finance Committee and/or the Executive Board. International dues are paid out of the general operating fund. This fund also acts as a pass-through account for all chapter donations to our state and international projects. The majority of receipts and disbursements are from chapter donations to the state and international projects. This is why the receipts and disbursements columns have large dollar amounts, but the beginning and ending balances, which are the actual amounts in the checking account, are much lower. Donations processed and sent to international by the state treasurer. At no point are donations used for expenses, and doing so would violate our Constitution. The General Reserve Fund acts as a savings account or a rainy day fund. It is an interest-bearing account, receiving interest income twice a year. Over the previous few years, money has been transferred from this fund into the General Operating Fund to cover the budget shortfall in dues income. The International Convention Reserve Fund receipts are from the $2 dues allocation. Again, this fund provides financial support for Montana State Chapter's delegates to attend convention of international chapter in the odd years. Montana Cotty Reserve Fund is the Montana State Cotty Scholarship Fund. This is funded by donations from chapters and it is administered by the state chapter. This is one of the Cotty scholarships available in Montana. The State Cotty College Committee awards the scholarship. The Cotty Travel Assistance Fund is funded by donations from chapters. The purpose of this fund is to provide travel assistance to young women to visit Cotty College. This fund is administered by the state chapter. The Montana Cotty Scholarship Fund is funded by donations from chapters and is administered through the P.E.O. Foundation. This fund begins and ends with a zero balance as these funds are awarded each year. The State Cotty College Committee awards the scholarship. Finally, Jane Hammer Holmgren Scholarship Fund is funded by donations from chapters and is administered through the P.E.O. Foundation. This fund begins and ends with a zero balance as these funds are awarded each year. The State Jane Hammer Holmgren Scholarship Fund Committee awards the scholarship. There is more information in the proceedings on pages LC5 and LC6 regarding our 4 Montana scholarships. From this report, the state chapter's total assets are quite impressive. A significant portion of the total assets reflect the generosity of our local chapters, the donations to our projects. The Finance Committee, in collaboration with the Executive Board, develops an annual budget for the General Operating Fund, with consideration to the General Reserve Fund and the International Convention Reserve Fund. Sunny.
So, what is a budget? A budget is defined as an estimate or plan of probable income and expenditures for a set period of time. That's it. It's a plan. It is simply a mathematical representation of income minus expenses. The State Finance Committee, per accounting best practices, as well as recommendations from international, does realistic budgeting, where the members of the state chapter see actual expenses as incurred by the state executive board. Realistic budgeting allows for greater transparency of expenditures and allows for flexibility of unanticipated or unexpected expenses throughout the year. The budget is not, nor cannot be, a zero balance budget. Why? Because again, a budget is a plan. A zero balance budget may be useful for short-term financial goals, say for a month or two, where every dollar of recurring income and expenses are monitored. However, for our state chapter's annual budget, zero balance budgeting removes flexibility for unanticipated or unexpected expenses. Monitoring expenses against a one-time annual income does not take into consideration price increases throughout the year for necessary expenses, and it doesn't allow for long-term financial goal setting. In a sense, it is micromanaging while losing sight of the bigger picture. How is the budget different from the checking account? The state's chapter realistic budget is a plan for income and expenditures for the coming fiscal year. It is easy to see a deficit in the budget and think that the state is operating with a negative checking account balance. The checking account of the general operating fund is the actual amount of money that is available to spend according to the realistic budget. These are the dollars that are reported on the summary of receipts and expenditures, page R12 of the proceedings. For obvious reasons, the state chapter cannot operate with a negative checking account balance. How is the budget developed? To develop the annual budget, the Finance Committee uses the expenditures reported on the monthly financial statements of the current fiscal year and makes reasonable recommendations for expenditures for the coming fiscal year. The State Board provides information, including mileage estimates for organizer visits, state convention lodging and meal prices, and any other information the State Finance Committee requests. The Finance Committee, in developing the state chapter's realistic budget, takes into consideration that income from dues occurs once a year and allows for flexibility for unexpected expenses because neither the Finance Committee nor the state officers can predict exactly what will happen in the coming year. In just a moment, we will define the line items of the budget, but first, a quick reminder. When reviewing the budget as presented at convention, there are three columns: adopted, actual, and proposed. We will use last year's budget as our example. The adopted column is the budget that was voted upon at convention last year. The actual column shows the total of each line item expense as incurred by the state chapter in the previous year, with the fiscal year being April 1 to March 31. The Finance Committee encourages you to spend a few minutes comparing the adopted and actual columns. Do you notice that the actual expenses are less than the adopted budget? The Finance Committee develops a budget with reasonable recommendations, and the State Executive Board works diligently for expenditures to be less than the budgeted amount. The proposed column is the budget that is adopted at convention. Because the state chapter's fiscal year is April 1 to March 31, and our convention is either May or June, the budget is adopted retroactively. Let's break down the elements of the budget. We will focus on the definitions of the line items, not the proposed amounts.
The first element is receipts. This is the income section of the budget. The Montana state dues are the dues that are sent to the state treasurer every March. The dues are separated into dues and the ICR fund. This is the state chapter's significant income and is received once a year. Per our state bylaws, $2 of each member's dues goes into the International Convention Reserve Fund, or ICR. The funds in this account are used to pay delegates' expenses to attend convention of international chapter in the odd years. Next is interest earned on general savings. This is the interest income earned from our general reserve fund. Interest is deposited twice a year. As you know, interest earned on interest-bearing accounts is subject to the current federal interest rates. The last two lines are subscriptions to the Montana Marguerite for those who wish to receive a hard copy, and miscellaneous income, which has historically been a transfer of funds from the International Convention Reserve Fund into the General Operating Fund, or other miscellaneous income such as refunds. The amount in bold type is the total amount received into the General Operating Fund. There are several line items of expenses. We will go through each one as sometimes the abbreviations may not make sense. First is the transfer of funds. We need to show the transfer of $2 per member for the International Convention Reserve Fund from the General Operating Fund. We vote upon this transfer at convention. New this year is the transfer from General Operating Fund into the General Reserve Fund. Last year, the State Executive Board announced their goal to replenish the General Reserve Fund to get the balance to equal 1 year's expenses. The Finance Committee is recommending this year to begin transferring monies from the General Operating Fund into the General Reserve Fund. This line item will appear on the 2026-27 budget at convention. Administrative expenses are those related to officer training, website maintenance, virtual meeting platform, the online convention registration, and the subscription for the state treasurer's accounting program. Also included is the fee for the state chapter's audit performed by Denman and Company. The state chapter has worked with them for many years now. Their fee is similar to other accounting firms, with the bonus of being very familiar with P.E.O. Finally, the chapter pays the required insurance fee for the officers. Officer expenses, board meetings, official visit. What goes into officer expenses? According to the P.E.O. Constitution, Part 2, Article 9, Finance, Section 5, Executive Board, the state chapter shall pay all expenses incurred by the Executive Board in transacting official business, unless otherwise specified in the state chapter's bylaws. The state bylaws provide additional guidance for allowed state officer expenses in Article 6, Section 4. These expenses include paper, ink, postage, travel, and/or meals associated with official business, and general supplies. There is a paper trail of receipts and expense reports that are submitted by the officers at each board meeting. Subscriptions to necessary computer software, such as Microsoft Office 365, internet service, cell phones, cell phone service, auto maintenance, and insurance are not considered allowable expenses. Board meetings. Officers are required to attend board meetings. Their allowed expenses include officers' mileage to board meetings, meals at the board meetings, and lodging. The officers hold in-person meetings for the summer and fall meetings to complete onboarding and training of the new officers. The officers meet virtually for the winter board meeting, as has been done historically. Finally, spring pre-convention and post-convention meetings are held at the convention venue, and those lodging costs are negotiated in the convention contract. This year, the state officers are meeting virtually over 2 nights for the pre-convention meeting, thus a significant savings in lodging and meals. A quick word about meals. The state chapter reimburses meals up to $50 per day per officer. It is not per diem. Officers do provide their own meals at board meetings when possible. Local chapters have provided meetings as well. Official visits. This past year, the organizer scheduled official visits with financial considerations in mind. The official visits were scheduled so an officer visited several chapters in one area whenever possible. And these visits were as geographically close to the visiting officer as possible. This provided savings in mileage expenses and in time away from home and or work for the visiting officer. The Chapter Vitality Coach Program was instituted last year and will continue this year. Because it is a new program, there have not been expenses incurred to date. Under this program, chapters may request a vitality coach to provide one-on-one support to improve chapter health. Monies must be budgeted each year for chapter supplies, for new chapter organization, and newly merged chapters. The Montana Marguerite newsletter has some associated expenses and are covered by the subscription price. Each state standing committee has a budget of $75 and can be utilized at the discretion of each respective committee. There are 14 state standing committees. The Convention Advisory Committee receives a total of $225, as there are 3 members of this committee. A small amount is budgeted for memorials in the event that a past state president enters chapter eternal during the year. Convention expenses. Bear with us as we jump around a bit between convention line item expenses. According to the P.E.O. Constitution, Part 2, Article 9, Finance, Section 4, the state chapter pays for the printing of the convention program and rental of the meeting place. In addition to the convention program, other convention-related materials are printed by the state chapter. The Finance Committee and the Executive Board discuss a realistic amount to budget for the convention planning and advances line item. This amount is the deposit for the convention venue. This is part of the negotiated contract that is signed a year or 2 in advance of convention. The state president presiding that year, plus her convention advisory committee, negotiate for the best price for the convention venue, and the facilities equipment rentals line item, which is for tech equipment required for the business meeting. Transportation mileage is for the state officers to travel to state convention. The Montana State Chapter Bylaws, Article 6, Finance, Section 2, state that the expenses of the convention lodging, meals, transportation expenses up to $50 for each newly organized chapter for travel to convention are covered by the state chapter. Per our bylaws, the state chapter pays for 1 delegate meal packet for each chapter. In recent years, this has been over $13,000, the single largest expense for the state chapter. The Finance Committee has proposed an amendment for the state chapter and local chapters to share this cost for budget reduction purposes. The Convention Advisory Committee is a separate line item in the budget. However, those expenses are discussed in the state chapter bylaws. The period of instruction and the time of remembrance are required elements of state convention. Each year, the Finance Committee plans for expenses for these events. A $200 rental fee for the time of remembrance is budgeted if it is away from the convention venue. Finally, it is customary to give a small gift and honorarium to the international representative for her time shared with Montana P.E.O. The following is a list of the expenses covered by the convention hostess chapters, as summarized in the convention handbook that is shared with each convention's hostess chapters. The hostess chapters determine their own budget for their part of hosting state convention. The State Finance Committee is independent of the hostess chapters for any given state convention. Hostess chapters budget for 1. Convention invitations, communication expenses. printing of meal tickets, name badges, program for each event, and song sheets if required, envelopes for registration packages, all expenses for the pre-convention dinner if held, all decorations for meals, dinner entertainment, their meals, other associated costs, all costs for convention breaks, registration reception if held, and photographs for the state historian records. The final element of the budget are miscellaneous expenses. Jeannie?
Thank you. LEAD is a required conference for the president and the organizer. While international covers the cost of airline travel, meals, and lodging during the conference, the state chapter pays the travel to and from the airport, airport parking fees, and meals on travel days. Expenses for a convention of international chapter are budgeted in the odd years when it is held. Funds from the International Convention Reserve Fund are utilized for this specific line item. The total expenses are summed up on the total disbursement of funds line in bold font. Finally, there is a budget surplus deficit line that is a difference between the total receipts of funds and the total disbursement of funds. The goal is to have a budget surplus. However, factors like sudden or unexpected inflationary pressures or significant loss in income can result in a budget deficit. Remember, a budget is a financial plan, and the amount of money in the general operating fund is the actual amount in the checking account, which has a positive balance. The budget for the coming fiscal year is presented at the state convention and is voted upon by the delegates. Now, here are a few commonly asked questions. FAQ number 1. A frequently asked question is why the state chapter has been operating with a budget deficit. Global pandemic several years ago hit P.E.O hard. State chapter has experienced a net loss of 532 members the year 2019 to last year 2025. This net loss in membership is from members going in active, deaths, and transfers out in order of greatest loss to the least. The estimated loss in dues income from those becoming and remaining inactive from the years between 2019 and 2025 is a cumulative $62,103.50. During that same time, inflation soared, which resulted in higher prices for paper, ink, postage, food, lodging, and general supplies. Everything saw a price increase. Also, there was no dues increase during those early years of the global pandemic. Cognizant of the budget deficit, the state board has worked diligently in the past years to reduce their costs. However, they have reduced their costs as much as they can. There is no more blood left in that proverbial turnip. Two ways to increase income are an increase in membership and or increase in dues. Local chapters greatly benefit from increasing their membership, which benefits the state chapter in dues income. Increasing dues does not only addresses the income shortfall, but addresses inflationary pressures as well. The Finance Committee proposes another small dues increase this year to help replenish the International Convention Reserve Fund. If adopted, this dues increase will not only replenish this specific fund, but will also relieve financial strain on the general operating fund. FAQ number 2. Convention is expensive. Why can't we hold or have a virtual convention or hold convention every other year? The P.E.O Constitution does have a provision allowing for virtual conventions with the approval of the Executive Board of International Chapter. This provision is limited to extenuating circumstances such as a global pandemic or a natural disaster affecting the convention venue. To date, strain on a state chapter's financial resources is not considered an extenuating circumstance. Holding convention every other year has a more complicated answer. Please bear with us. One of the responsibilities of the president of international chapter is to ensure that all local and state, district, provincial chapters observe the laws of the sisterhood for uniformity in procedures. This is why all chapter meetings are the same no matter what chapter you visit. This applies to state, district, provincial conventions as well. No one state can hold a convention every other year, regardless of reason, because the uniformity of the laws would be compromised. Also, meeting every other year would compromise the nonprofit group exemption the IRS has granted to P.E.O. and its subsidiaries, the local and state chapters. FAQ number 3. What has the state board done to save money? The executive board in recent years has worked towards saving money where possible. They have done an excellent job. However, there's very little room left without seriously compromising the reimbursements as guaranteed in the P.E.O. Constitution and the state bylaws. The following is a summary of the cost-saving measures the executive board has done. Reduce paper, ink, postage, and general supplies by using email for official business, including the holiday greetings, and by going paperless by utilizing cloud storage for required archived documents, thus reducing the need for binders, file folders, and boxes. Kept lead conference expenses to a minimum. Organizer visit mileage expenses were reduced by scheduling 10 special meetings this year and maximizing the chapters visited per trip. Visits were also scheduled as geographically close to the visiting or proxy officer. Board meeting expenses have been reduced, with state officers providing their own meals when possible, carpooling when possible, utilizing members' homes for free when possible, and when mileage is also considered. If a short-term rental is needed, the board reserves less expensive rentals. This coming year, the pre-convention meeting will be held virtually over 2 nights, thus saving lodging and meal costs for 2 nights, saving an estimated $2,978. The executive board last year provided all their own meals for pre- and post-convention meetings, saving an estimated $1,000. An amendment was adopted at the 2025 convention to remove the requirement that the lodging for the 4 immediate past presidents is paid by the state chapter. The bylaw requiring the state chapter to reimburse mileage to chapters traveling more than 500 miles round trip was removed by adoption of an amendment proposed by a local chapter, thus a substantial savings in mileage costs. Reduce convention printing costs by providing some materials in a convention print package available on the state website, as well as continuing to use the lowest printing quote available. And finally, reduce the convention honorariums. The Finance Committee recommends removing this line item from convention expenses starting this year. The Finance Committee encourages the Executive Board to continue these cost-saving measures where possible. We thank you for attending today's virtual workshop. There's a lot of information covered today. If you have questions, please send an email copying all of the Finance Committee members. Myself, Jeannie Peterson, Leanne Forrester, and Sunny Davis. Thank you again.